And you've just heard All That Is True by Day Sleeper featuring Magpie Blue. And I'm joined now by Edwin McLachlan from the band. Hello there.
Hello, how you doing?
Really well, thanks. Yeah, good. So tell us about All That Is True and how you came to work with Magpie Blue as well.
Sure. All That Is True is a song that kind of ran parallel to the rest of the EP, Everything There Is, that it now kind of adds to on the expanded edition. And it just never got quite finished. It's quite an unusual song, like structurally, it's kind of linear, like it doesn't really have repeated sections or, out with a couple of things that you could describe as hooks. It's quite abstract in a way.
Mhm.
I think the thing that I was most drawn to was probably the kind of it's got a really interesting emotional trajectory for me, where lyrically it's initially a bunch of it's kind of like revealing insecurities to someone you care a lot about. Not even necessarily in a romantic way. It could just be someone close to you in any sense. And then it kind of even without the musical dynamic aspect, there's like a lyrical dynamic where that then grows to be like just espousing how much you love someone essentially. And I thought that kind of trajectory, because initially all it was just a little acoustic demo, that lyrical trajectory was where I saw this kind of compelling like potential, and I wanted to keep working on it, but it never quite landed. And then we started to finish it as we were releasing the companion EP, Everything Else, and that was where a kind of end goal, like a purpose for the song,
Right.
started to reveal itself. It's like, oh well, when Asai suggested doing the vinyl release, it was like, well, we could do some extra tracks. This song's here. Why don't we do that? So it kind of just was in the right place at the right time. And it's a very odd song. It's a very unusual song to release as a single, which is kind of why I wanted to release it as a single in a way. Because I feel like there's two, probably more than two, but there's at least two considerations when it comes to releasing singles. There's obviously, well, what's the most accessible song? What's the most what's the logical choice for if you're going to put a song out by itself and for it to stand on its own 2 feet? What's that? But another one is like the implicit messaging of a choice behind a song, because I think I can tell people a lot about the artist. You'll get some bands where like there's a classic single trajectory where, say, there's 3 pre-release singles from an album that a band's doing. You'll have the first single might be something that's kind of by the books and it's a bit what people expect, and people will be like, either really into it or they'll be like, oh, it's just more of the same.
Yeah.
Then the second song will be a total curveball and everyone goes like, what is this? This is garbage. Or they'll go, this is really interesting. But like the implicit messaging of that is the band kind of going, in that case, we're going to give you a bit of what you want. We understand what you want, but also we're going to do whatever the fuck we want, that kind of thing. And that's always very interesting to me because of what it signals. And obviously the artist isn't always choosing the singles. Sometimes it's management, but like, or label or what have you.
Mhm.
But still, there's something quite compelling about that. So in this case, it was like, I think with Day Sleeper, there is a lot of, um, as a kind of entity, as a project, it will do whatever it does, and there's not necessarily any preconception behind that. It's all vibes. So I think releasing a single that is, quite obtuse in a way, like, it's very slow burning. There is not really, as I say, there's a couple of hooks in it, but there's nothing to immediately grab a casual listener. uh it's quite counterintuitive, but that's very us. So that was all of which is to say it ended up being simultaneously a counterintuitive but also logical choice of a single. And as far as getting Millie, Magpie Blue, involved in it, um collaboration is a very important thing for me. I like
Yeah.
bringing in as many people as possible. There weren't any features on the first EP per se, but there's a whole bunch of different people. Our friend Fraser, who performs as Lynn Byrne, most of Half Formed Things were on it, and so on.
Yeah.
So I've always got a list kind of in my head at all times of people I'd like to work with, like people I think are interesting. And I love Millie's music. Millie's fantastic. Millie's a very, very unique artist. And I've been lucky enough to work with her before um on different things. So she's always kind of there. And then the second step of that is, you're looking out for opportunities, not to shoehorn anything in because that sucks, but just looking for opportunities where like a collaborative thing kind of naturally reveals itself. And then when you're in one of those situations, it's like you're evaluating that list of people you've got and going, well, what works and what doesn't work. And in the case of All That Is True, we had the vocal part, we had points where I was like, well, thematically and kind of narratively, it makes a lot of sense for this to be another voice. And then it just becomes, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a technical exercise because you're just thinking in terms of notes and range. It's like, well, out of all these potential people I'd like to pitch it to, who do I know? It's like in those notes in that register, their voice sounds good and stuff. And it was just very obviously Millie. And as it transpired, it was a perfect fit. So that's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, but it's interesting because actually it kind of touches on some of the other questions I was going to ask you.
Right.
After we finish talking, we're going to hear the track All I Slept, which is a collaboration with Lindsay Clark. So I always ask how important collaborations are, not just to yourself, but to Day Sleeper as a band. But clearly something that, you've got, let's talk about Day Sleeper as the band, how it came about, and who else is involved, because I think that's interesting.
Of course. So Day Sleeper, basically, I joined Mount Doubt, which was Leo's kind of solo project with band that he had been doing forever, and I was a very big fan of. I was a huge, huge fan of their last LP. I think their third record that was Doubtlands, and that came out 2020. I think it was like a pandemic record, and I absolutely rinsed it. I was obsessed with it. I listened to it so much. And we just before that, my band Half Formed Things had gotten Leo to open for us at our last show with one of our members. And I loved the way Leo delivered his songs live and solo. There was a really interesting kind of elasticity and kind of borderline improvisational dynamic to it. And as I would come to find, that was mostly because he was playing stuff that was half finished and he was kind of winging it. But I found that very compelling, and I didn't personally think that any of the existing Mount Doubt studio releases captured that. But Doubtlands was like as close to fully capturing it as Mount Doubt got, just in terms of the lushness and the kind of breadth of sonics and the emphasis of, like, I think his lyrics were at a real peak on that as well for Mount Doubt, and so on and so forth. Anyway, around about then I end up joining for what would be the last Mount Doubt tour, and I kind of wanted to push stuff in a different direction with that tour, where previously Mount Doubt had been, as a live band, it had been a lot more production heavy. I kind of wanted it to be like a Bruce Springsteen show or like a Bad Seeds show, where there's like a kind of big ensemble, chaotic, almost very organic energy in terms of how tempos push and pull, in terms of just rearranging the set list, in terms of changing arrangements on the fly, and so on. And by the end of that last Mount Out tour, that lineup I think was like peak. It was really, really good. It was a great show, and me and Leo were really energized, and we went to start writing what would be the fourth Mount Out record. And so that was, taking Leo's songs, but with my approach to production, which involved kind of cutting up and adjusting his songs in a way that hadn't been done before. Mount Out had been more like taking his songs and just literally putting them into music, with not much, not much like, let's cut that verse back a bit, let's repeat this, let's make that the chorus, none of that. So I kind of brought that to the table, and I brought my sonic palette, which is like, very very new wave, very, I'm very influenced by Blue Nile and artists like that. So that, it was all something a bit different, and it just started to become inevitable. It started to feel like, well, this record is going to sound nothing like
Right.
any previous Mount Out record. And it was me that was just like, rather than this being another record in what is essentially a solo artist plus band project, which at this point this isn't anymore, let's just start a new band. And I think Leo agreed with that, and I think he definitely agreed with it, but I think he liked the idea of properly turning a page on things,
Right.
because it is very different, and as an entity it functions very differently. And then we started recording our debut EP and forming a lineup as we went. So it's myself, it's Leo, it's Ryan Firth, also formerly Mount Out, doing keys and all sorts of things. It's James Callahan, also formerly Mount Out, Bronston as well, doing guitars and bass. Liam Dempsey, who fronts Ferns, and also played live saxophone occasionally with Mount Out. We've got Karen Miller playing guitar. Karen does loads of stuff. She does Berta Kennedy. Berta Kennedy previously did Swiss Portrait, a bunch of other artists. So yeah, it's a very diverse bunch of people. Geez, I didn't miss anyone, did I? That would be awful. No, I don't think I did, but that would be unforgivable. Yeah, it's a very diverse bunch of people. Everyone's kind of drawing from different influences and different backgrounds. Yeah, which makes for an interesting creative environment.
And knowing you, you've always, I mean, you've been making your own music, but you've always enjoyed collaborating with other people. You've always played in other people's bands and things like that as
Yeah.
well. So for you, does this seem like a really, because it with asking other people to come in and sing, so quite a fluid band, you know, if track by track, you can get people in and think, yeah, this will work for this track. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like in terms of my personal listening, I listen to a lot of hip hop, and a lot of my favorite artists, or like a lot of my biggest kind of creative inspirations are or have been people like, you know, Kanye West, to say nothing of where he's gone, but in the past, and even people like Travis Scott, who, like, you know, Travis Scott isn't even necessarily, you could argue he's not even necessarily that great an artist, but just the kind of creative sphere that he represents, where people just come in and out, and people are kind of cast in roles across these, you know, extremely diverse and changing projects and such. I find that really compelling, and I think fluidity as it pertains to bands is also very compelling for me. I like that a lot. A lot of the bands I liked the most when I was growing up and I was really into post-punk, you'd have bands like Perubu or The Fall or what have you, where the lineup is super fluid, and it kind of, yeah, I mean, I can't even necessarily put it to words, but there's an interesting, like, Theseus's ship kind of question, or like art projectiness to, like, you know, what actually makes a band when you just start pulling things in and out and in and out. And I like that. I like what's the word? I like deconstructing that as much as possible. Because at the end of the day, the only thing I care about is just ending up with a bunch of records that are wonderful. You know, that's the only driving thing.
It's really interesting. I mean, The Fall's a great example, because people might say, what makes The Fall The Fall? Well, it's Marquis Smith. But actually, it's not, because it's the songs as well, which stay with them and change when different versions play them. I've seen them live many times, and that was definitely the case. There's an essence to the band that is not just about the members, it's about the music that they make.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like I'm a big kind of believer in the band as a performance art project almost, and it's all inclusive, like everything about it, from the individual people that are involved at any given time, to the work they create, to the people who engage with that work, so people at live performances, fans as it were of a band. That's all part of this kind of weird social art project thing. So it's much bigger than the individuals involved, I think, as well. not to get too metaphysical about it, but there is the cumulative effect of all that stuff, the people, the work, the people that engage with it, the places that goes to. That is in its totality what the band is, and I find that very compelling. I think that's cool.
Well, it sounds, you mentioned earlier on about, trying to make live shows Springsteen-esque, or different bad seeds is a great example again. Different every night, so that every time there's something new. If people went to see you 5 nights in a row, it might be 5 different experiences.
Sure, that's the ideal for me, actually. I never used to be like that. I used to be very into aggressively programmed sets. It's partly just how my brain works, but like I do quite enjoy doing the same thing over and over again on a personal level. Like if I'm touring and it's with a show that is basically the same set every night, the kind of athletic challenge almost of trying to get each bit better and better every night, I enjoy that a lot. However, as an end user, as someone who engages with music as a fan sometimes when I'm not working on it, like I actually do really enjoy things being shaken up, and your artists that change. I'm a huge fan of War on Drugs, and like they'll just do whatever at an incredibly high level, but any given night they might whap out a song that's like almost 20 years old that they haven't played in however long. I love that kind of thing. And with Day Sleeper, the ideal is to kind of bridge the gap between the fact that Day Sleeper is very high production. It's very the live show's quite sleek in a lot of ways, but also leaving room for kind of as much controlled chaos as you can, and as much adjustment to the set list, which we've started doing. We've started kind of adjusting set lists as the kind of pool of songs we have to draw from is growing, and it's really growing. We have like so many songs, barely any of which are actually released yet. We change the set list up on the fly. The other day we were playing down south, and we basically decided on the set list on the day, more or less, and that's starting to get towards what I feel is truly exciting about the whole rock band thing, as exciting as that can be anyway nowadays, but yeah.
And I'm interested in how a sound of a band emerges. Is it through playing together? Is it through initial ideas? Is it through influences? Because it must
for sure
just be one person and then say play. Well, it can be, I suppose, if you're James Brown or something, say this is what you must play.
Yeah.
For you, for the ideas that you've set out, how does it emerge?
Yeah, because with any given band, it's always different how it ends up where it ends up. As you say, I feel like the ground zero for our sound is probably Leo's voice, I think. In the sense that when I'm arranging stuff, I'm usually taking into consideration the fact that he's got a very distinct voice. It occupies a very particular frequency bandwidth. He's got quite a low and articulate kind of voice, and there's a lot of emphasis on lyrics, and there's a lot of structural abstraction. There's a lot of kind of verses that don't have consistent lengths. They just kind of follow the cadence and the content of the lyrics and such. So that always ends up dictating the type of music you make, in the sense that it's one thing if you've got frequency considerations, if a vocalist sits in a certain range, but then if a lyricist, I should say, tends to write lyrics that are quite meandering not in a bad way, but go for a bit, you're more likely to make instrumentals that are a bit loopier and a bit more kind of giving them space to breathe and such, which is definitely a thing that we've seen. Because as far as our sound developed, it was a whole process, because the first EP is like everyone's on it, but it's mostly me, Leo, and Ryan, because we started doing the stuff. Started writing the materials so early, so a lot of the guitars and synths and such, and obviously the drums are just me. So it was like there was a lot of like just my palette getting inflicted on everything, which is why there's so much, new wave guitar sounds and mellotrons and like Moog bass lines and stuff. And then as everyone else has become, as we assembled the lineup and everyone else has become more involved, you see the other influences coming in. And because we have a dynamic where there's a principal songwriter in Leo, but there's also a principal kind of self-producer who's me, and I take everyone's bits and I try and just like blend it all together. And I'll, if something works, I'll ask for more of that. If something doesn't work, I'll either bin it or I'll ask for things to change and such. There's like central points for things to be kind of distilled at. So which I think is a good way to work, because it means that like you get the benefits of having a diverse range of people involved in the band, but there's still like a degree of stylistic cohesion at the end of that. You know what I mean? And it's just trying to find that balance at all times. And it's all reactive. It's all about just, what am I hearing? What do I like about what I'm hearing? How do I accentuate the things I like about what I'm hearing? And just repeating that process a million times per song, essentially. So yeah, it's always changing.
And in terms of playing live, I mean, I don't think there's a band around I want to see live more. I've not been able to catch you yet. Is there going to be opportunities? Have you got dates lined up?
Yes, absolutely. There's quite a few. So we're putting out this vinyl through Asai on June 14th. I think it's June 14th. That day we're also playing London, our first London show at the Cavendish Arms, I want to say, which will be cool. And the following weekend we're playing our own show at at Cabaret Voltaire in Edinburgh, which I have not set foot in since maybe 2011 or something. It's been a very long time, so that'll be interesting. So that's us. Magpie Blue, Millie is supporting. We have another support that I don't know if I can announce yet, but there'll be at least a couple. So that's June 22nd. So anyone who wants to see us is very welcome to pop down. It'll be a cool show. Don't quite know what we're playing yet. Anything's possible. It's gonna be a ride. But yeah.
And also, you've talked about how many songs you've got.
Mm.
So are you already thinking about what's coming next? Have you already got you kind of?
Oh yeah.
Well, yes, there's more.
Always. For better or worse, I'm always fixated on the next thing. So it's there is an EP and three albums worth of stuff sitting there, and it's a question of how do we do this? It's like, because I mean, I like being prolific. I'm not really interested in the model of like endlessly sitting on stuff for ages and ages and ages and ages. But I'm not like utopian about it in the sense that I want people to hear it. So there has to be a reconciliation of those two things. So it's just a question of working out the most sensible way of getting out that much material, whilst also considering like there's like logistical considerations that people miss all the time, in the sense that, like, for example, if you've got a band who they've been working on their debut album for like 2 years or 3 years, just accumulating those songs, maybe releasing some of them as a debut EP and re-recording them, all that process. If you've got all that, then it gets handed over to a label who picks it up. And then it's like, okay, well, we need like a year or more to allow for press and so on and so forth. Yeah. That is logistically valid. However, that can also kill bands, because when you're fast forwarding to the end of that, it's like, well, by this point, you're 4 years in with these songs and sitting on them, potentially up to that. And then now you've got to go out on tour with them for like a year or more. So you're going to be having like half a decade old songs on your back for this long. And I know from like, not direct experience, but witnessing it from other people, that can break bands irreparably. So there's always a logistical consideration of like, behind the scenes, what is the ramifications potentially of doing things a certain way. So with us, the consideration is, well, if we don't get stuff out as soon as realistically possible, we're just going to be drowning in songs, because Leo does not stop writing. it just keeps coming. So it's like, we've again, as I say, an EP and 3 albums worth of music I think is really good already, and that's just continuing to grow. So if we work on a basis of like a year and a half per album cycle, we'll never get rid of all these fucking songs. So it's like, something's got to give. So that's the kind of thing we're thinking about. So there's a lot to be done, but
but that's exciting. The idea that that you've got you're continuing to create? Because I think you're right. There's a kind of halt in the creative process if you're sitting on the same songs for that amount of time. Whereas if you continue to create, it changes, I guess, everything. It's
absolutely. Yeah, I mean the creative process, like even if you're someone who is like an android about music stuff, someone who's all business, the creative process is also part of the pragmatic side, because the thing that you're selling will not exist unless the kind of woolly hippy dippy creative process side of things is addressed and allowed to be to some extent. So yeah, that's the other side of the kind of, I guess it's kind of dialectical or whatever, but yeah, the push and pull between those elements, which never ends.
Edwin, it's always great to talk to you, and
Likewise,
all the
man.
best with the future releases. And I'm definitely going to try and catch you live as well.
Thank you. Please do. Yeah, you're always welcome. We'll guest you.
Thanks very much. And this is Day Sleeper featuring Lindsay Clark and All I Slept.